Hello everybody. At some point I really probably am going to have to buy a Jaguar because people keep bringing them to me, and I'm very lucky because the Jaguars that get brought to me are often something quite unusual, and so is the case with today's car. This is a 1990 Jaguar XJS, and it's been converted from its original 3-speed automatic to a 5-speed manual by its lovely owner Scott, who bought it last year as a bit of a lockdown project to enjoy with his father. And I have to say, what a fine and majestic car this is. The XJS is another one of those cars that I never actually even sat in until I got the chance to drive it. And I'm very grateful to him for bringing it out. The XJS, in fact, as a whole, is a very oddball car. It was introduced to replace the E-Type, but it really wasn't actually much of a direct replacement for that car. The E-Type was supposedly more overtly sporting, whereas the XJS was always very clearly a GT car. In fact, when it debuted in 1975, it was available exclusively with a 5.3 litre V12, an engine that remained an option at the very least until the car finished production 21 years later. Oh, KV registered Aston Martin. That could be an Aston development car, big wing on the back. I've seen that car a few times around here. Now, when it first came out, you could actually get this car with a 4-speed manual box. Those were apparently holdovers from the E-Type's production, where the manual was something you could get. But it didn't last very long, and so for pretty much all of the car's life, if you had the V12, you would have an auto. Jaguar had perfect timing with the XJS, releasing a car with a V12 as its sole engine option in the middle of an oil crisis. They did then later introduce a 6-cylinder as the more economical option, and it's one of those 6-cylinders that's donated its gearbox to this build. But let's be honest here, if you're going to buy one of these cars, it's the V12 that you want. Now, this isn't actually the first time that I've driven a Jaguar with this V12 engine in it, although strictly speaking what I drove last time was a Daimler, the 66, actually of a very much similar vintage. Now, that had the original 3-speed auto in it, exactly the same, I suspect, as would have gone into this, and that really did ruin proceedings. The engine, by all accounts, is actually very good when it works, but when you pair it with a gearbox like that, it does everything that it can to really blunt this car's performance. Out of the factory gates, these allegedly made about 295 horses, which is a fairly reasonable amount. They're still a pretty big, heavy, weighty car, but as a GT, 300 horsepower should be more than enough, and the engine was smooth, if nothing else. Doesn't sound it, I have to say, sounds somewhat agricultural, but smooth it definitely is. Speedo, not really behaving. Nope. Where do you even start with a car like this? Because there is so much to talk about. Well, let's begin with where I'm sat. This does feel like a fairly luxurious and upmarket place, although if you told me to guess the age of it, you never would say 1990. It does feel more, well, early 80s really in here. There were 3 sort of generations of the XJS. The original came out in 75 and lasted to 81. This, the HE, then lasted from 81 to 91, and there was a final version which then took the model up to 1996. Its replacement was the XK, which I drove an example of recently, and that actually still shared pretty much the same floor pan as this car. So in some way, shape or form, an XJS was in production from 1975 to about 2005. Mad. Absolutely mad. Reasonably talky from low down. Having 2 extra ratios, of course, does make a big old difference, and this car is taking this road very well. I'm not pushing on yet. I want to take some time, get used to the car, get it up to temperature, and really start to enjoy it at the right moment. But it's very soft, very comfortable. The suspension is definitely of a sort of more GT rather than sporting bent. Visibility actually is pretty good. The rear 3/4 are not so great. Allegedly, the German authorities and a couple of others refused to type approve these cars because they thought those rear buttresses would really affect visibility. Compared to some modern cars I've been in, this thing's practically a goldfish bowl. there are plenty of signs of it being a product of Britain, like the visible screw heads here. Now, I want to be fair, because you get in an old air-cooled 911 and you'll have those on the dash, but they're just a little bit nasty there. But the leather quality is nice. Switchgear is terrible. This thin wood steering wheel feels like it belongs on a car from the 60s. Actually, rather nice, although I really don't want to have an accident with this. There are about 30 different keys to open all of the different things on the car, and it does have some really quite impressive luxury features when you consider how old the base of this car is. It has cruise control after a fashion, well, I don't think it works anymore. You do have heated seats and electrically adjustable lumbar, and they both work. Space in the rear is quite compromised, I must say. I really wouldn't want to carry anyone in there, if I'm honest. The boot, though, is very good. Exceedingly deep, actually. It pretty much goes to the road, it feels like, so you can actually get a lot of stuff in here. The bonnet feels like it goes on for days. Absolutely enormous, and of course below it you will find that 5.3 litre engine. Now, there were throughout various points in time a few manufacturers who actually did different versions of that engine. Lister and TWR probably being two of the better known ones. They did one up to I think about 7.4 litres, and it had a lot of success in racing. Now, when you open the engine bay, you are greeted with what looks essentially like a snake's nest. It's not a very tidy or pretty thing to look at. Now, the theory is that everything that you could ever need to get to is there, and if you understand it, apparently it does make some sense. But most people didn't really understand it, so when things went wrong, often wrong things were then done to try and fix problems, and it was all just a little bit of a mess. And then, of course, you have the real kicker. The HE in this car's model name stands for high efficiency. Proof, if ever it were needed, that Jaguar are a company not without a sense of humour, because the HE version of the V12 engine dragged its fuel economy kicking and screaming from about 9 miles to the gallon to around 10. Now, you might think I'm joking there. Look it up. I'm really not. So, now she's up to temperature, and I'm told if it goes anywhere above normal, then I'm in trouble, but currently it's sort of halfway between cold and normal. Let's see what she'll do. Wow, I'm impressed. I'm really impressed. She picks up and she moves. I couldn't tell you how fast, no matter how much I try, but this car certainly can get down the road. Now, let's check the brakes. Those are outboard disc at front, inboard discs at rear, and they have recently caused some issues for Scott. So, she stops as well. Much better than the last E-Type that I was out in, I can tell you that. Oh, that engine really is quite magnificent. This box dramatically changes this car. A complete transformation. Steering. Let's talk about steering. Not a highlight. Not a highlight at all. Once the car has weighted up, once you've actually taken all the slack out of the system, all the bushings are then sort of being worked, actually it does make some sense, but still, one has to remember this is a car designed as a GT. It has pretty tall profile tyres, 60 profile I think, 235s all round, and so there's a lot of squidge in this car for sure, but that's fine. This is kind of what you expect it to be like. We have oil pressure, that's good. We have voltage, even better. We have fuel, don't know how long that'll last for. I didn't ask how big the fuel tank was because, honestly, I don't want to know. And more accurately, I don't want to know quite how quickly it chomps through it. There's a trip computer down here though. Fuel, average, 0. So that works. The cost of doing a conversion like this, sort of between about £4,000 and £5,000 all in. Now, bearing in mind that was done by Scott and his father, and they are trained engineers / mechanics, so they do know what they're doing. but this is a job made relatively easy by the fact that there was a manual version of these, so there is more or less a space, or at least a plan for where everything is meant to go. This is quite fabulous. I've got to be honest, I'm really rather enjoying this. It's creaking along like an old creaky thing. You start to feel it pick up a front wheel at not that great a speed, it must be said. The way you get this car around a bend is you just set your angle and you then drive it real old school. Just use the throttle to adjust your angle of attack. This is an extraordinarily pleasant thing to be behind the wheel of. Really properly majestic. How much does it cost you to get into one of these? Well, this particular car was picked up for £8,000 and a bit, and then obviously on top of that they spend the money modifying it. It therefore is about the cheapest way you're ever going to get into a manual V12. Handbrakers are... Oh God. Oh God. Oh God. You know that bit in Top Gear where they tested the old British cars on a hill start? That's this, and it's not very good at it. Handbrake is weak at best. It's not only the car embarrassing itself today either. I've made a bit of a mess too. As you may have probably noticed, because hairdressers in England have been shut for quite some time, and I had visited one for a few months before they shut, my hair's been getting out of control. And so I've been spending an extortionate amount of money on hair gel, just trying to keep this stuff out of my eyes. And I noticed that this morning, I managed to gel my eyebrow. All right. I can imagine if I was doing this right about now with its original gearbox, I would be very frustrated. Instead, I'm having a whale of a time. Were those wipers there earlier? Have they moved? Oh no, that's just apparently where they park themselves. Halfway up the screen already. Stop. This is actually a fine engine, pulls very well from low down, revs out cleanly all the way to 7,000 actually, which is quite impressive when you consider the vintage of it. Responsive, you can actually place the car fairly well, because despite having acreage of bonnet in front of you, you can see all of it. You can also see it sort of slowly dancing about, making you wonder whether it's shut properly. But luckily it's sort of front hinge, so it's not really actually a big issue if it's not. It's always been a strange thing, the XJS. Considering the success that Jaguar had with the E-Type, you would have thought they'd have tried to sort of just keep the spirit of that car going, but they pretty much threw baby and bathwater out when they brought this car in. In fact, I'm pretty confident that the V12 engine is basically one of the few parts of the E-Type that made it over wholesale into the XJ. And I think Jaguar made the right decision, because it's taken me a long time to realise it, but the XJS is a very special thing in its own right. I suppose it was a modest success. 110,000 cars, actually a little bit more, sold is not bad, until you consider that that was over a span of 21 years. I suppose I should talk a little bit more about the gearbox itself, as that's one of the big things about this particular car. Clutch is very easy to use, got a bit of weighting to it, but a nice amount. You can modulate it very easily. Moving this car around at sort of car park speed is no chore at all. Very friendly, very easy, you don't stall it. The gear lever itself, not so great, there's a bit of play in it. The throw's reasonably long, but actually kind of suits the character of the car, and it's precise enough. You're never in any doubt as to whether you've got a gear or not. The little leaper on the front, I don't believe should actually be on this car. That's why there's a leaper and a badge. The car also has had a respray at some point in the past. We're not actually sure if XJS was ever available in this kind of black. It wasn't a very good respray either, so at some point that is all going to get fixed. But I'm not here to judge the standard of paintwork on this car. The interior actually is in fairly good condition. Very sort of typical Jaguar period combination of black vinyl on the dash, some wood, bit of leather, cheap switches, loads of chrome everywhere. And when you come to drive it through town, it's nice and sensible and easy, and it just sort of burbles along, and people look happy when they see it. Oh, there's an old Jaguar, they say. Not, look at that prick in the S2000. I noticed that the indicator and windscreen stalks are really far away from the wheel. Like they're over there. They're over there somewhere. Not the easiest to use. Also fairly nasty plastic. I'll be honest, I had absolutely no idea what to expect from this car. I know that the XK underneath is the same thing, but I was also fairly confident that in practice it would feel very, very different. And it does. This is a lot more raw, a lot rough around the edges, not a very refined product at all. But it's also wondrous, it's magnificent, it's majestic. It is a proper old school Jag. If you're into your kind of classic cars, this is a very, very cool thing to have. Not the cheapest to own and run, because even when it works, it's going to cost you a lot of money, and then when it doesn't, it's going to cost you even more money. But it now does that, which in standard guise, I'm sure it wouldn't have. I cannot really think of very many reasons why you wouldn't want this car to have this gearbox in it. It's going to be more economical, it's more fun to drive, it's faster. In period, this would have been about 0 to 60 in something like 7.6 seconds. I've no doubt whatsoever this will have improved that time quite considerably. Given the current price of many a classic car, especially those with a manual gearbox, about 15,000 quid to get yourself into one of these seems like a genuine bargain. Even smells like a real car too. When you pull up at a junction, if you drop the window down, you get that whiff of petrol and masculinity. Urgh. I've never been quite the biggest fan of the looks of the XJS, but then controversially, I've never actually loved the E-Type that much either, and I might actually prefer the way this looks over an E-Type, especially if you put the sort of the little sporty wing on the back. That's very cool. And in terms of cool, Scott's XJS, yeah, that goes in the fridge with the DB9, I think. I love it. It may be old and crap and British, but then so am I. We can get on, the XJS and I. Anyway, thank you all for coming along for the ride. Please like, comment down below, subscribe if you haven't already, and we'll see you all for the next one. Bye-bye.